And good afternoon. Oh, there is recording. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming into our session. Gonna go right into our first slide so that we can get into introductions. So please, in the chat, lots of things blocking my screen. What grade content area do you teach? And then what's a phrase or sentence to define critical race theory? And so I'll give my example and then pass over to Brandie to say hi and give her example. So again, my name is Leah, and my background is as a high school English teacher. I'm now currently a teacher educator at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And my phrase is that critical race theory illuminates the many ways institutional racism works. So whatever your understanding of CRT is at this point, add that into the chat. You want to say yours, Brandie?
Yeah. So I am Brandie. Don't know how to spotlight myself. Sorry, Keisha. All right. So I'm Brandie. I'm not invisible, but I am a former middle school and high school math teacher. I currently work as a math coach and consultant, as well as the co-founder of Radical Pedagogy Institute with Leah. And my sentence was that critical race theory is the study of racism in institutional and socio-political context.
Perfect, thank you. So we'll wait for some more, as some more answers come up in the chat, so we can kind of get an idea of what participants understand, and we can put emphasis on things that maybe we don't have as much understanding. The next slide, I'm not going to read to you. I just wanted to post it so that you get to know a little bit more about the Radical Pedagogy Institute community. So we open up our sessions with these norms. We are a professional learning community, primarily based in New Jersey, though we have members from across the country, pre-K to 12, higher ed as well, and not just classroom teachers, but also coaches and any of the other education workers that staff our schools and support our students. So we certainly encourage you to become a member. What's really important about the Radical Pedagogy Institute is that we connect practice with policy. So we talk a lot about the policies that exist in New Jersey and how they have an impact on our classrooms. And we also invite you to follow us on social media and all of those places that you'll see there at the bottom and on the rest of the slides, and to join us for Thursday Night Live. So the first Thursday of the month, we always have a Twitter chat. And then the third Thursday of the month, we have an Instagram Live, and they both always start at 7:30. And we're on there until 8:30 at the latest. So please join us for an hour, or you can always come back later and check out what we were talking about. So really loving the responses in the chat. I'm going to pass it over to Brandie.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks y'all for sharing your understanding of critical race theory. And I think we all have kind of an underlying understanding to some degree of what it is, because it's been talked about so much over the last year or two. But sometimes like getting to understand that nitty gritty is what we really need help with. So that's why we thought this session might be helpful. So there are several theories or several tenets of critical race theory, and it really started as in like legal studies to understand legal theory in terms of how race and racism kind of impacts law and those sorts of things. But it has expanded to multiple fields since then, including education. And there are multiple tenets that kind of center on critical race theory. The first one of which is the permanence of racism. And it's this idea that racism is a normal feature of society. It's embedded in our systems. It's not going away. So like, it's kind of like naming the thing and knowing that it's embedded and we have to, work for it. We have to work to disrupt it constantly. The second tenet is race is a social construct. So that's this understanding that race is something that we as a society have constructed to make sense of our world. It is not necessarily biological. It's not biologically real. I know there were, a whole field of eugenics that like tried to make it real, but it is not biologically real, and it is socially constructed and socially significant. The next one is the critique of liberalism and intersectionality. So basically, and those sometimes are separated as two different tenets, but the critique of liberalism is this idea, it comes from this idea of color blindness. I do a lot of stuff in queer theory as well. And this reminds me a lot of queer theory, which is talking about how like we don't really want, it's not that we want to join the norm, it's that what we want to abolish the norm. Like there shouldn't be a norm. And this kind of idea of colorblind, like we don't see color, is similar to that aspect. It's like, we're not going to acknowledge this anyway. We're going to think things are neutral. We're going to push the idea of incremental change and equal opportunity for all without really seeing like that can be very damaging and dismissive to people's lived realities. And then intersectionality is a concept that allows us to think about people's very situated identities in terms of like me as a queer Latinx white passing person, like my experience is very different than a queer Black trans woman. So thinking about the ways that multiple interlocking systems of oppression impact our everyday experiences. And then there's whiteness as property, which is this idea that because of the permanence of racism, the way that racism is embedded in our society, whiteness, we can kind of consider it as a type of property. And this notion operates on different levels. It can include like possession, the right to use and to be employed, the right to disposition, and the right of exclusion. So it's something that we possess, whiteness. And so thinking of it in terms of that. And counter storytelling is a big element of critical race theory. It's recognizing the relevance of people's everyday lives to scholarship and telling their stories, like embracing the stories that they're telling and preserving their histories and lived experiences through storytelling. And then also rejecting deficit-informed research that excludes the epistemologies of people of color. So we're making sure that it centers on the lived experience of people of color, specifically Black people. And then the last one is interest conversion, which is the idea that, white people let change happen if it's in their best interest, essentially. Like that's how change happens, when the interests converge. So those are the tenets of critical race theory, which you can look into. There's so much written about all of them, but that is a very brief snapshot of what each of those are. Leah, you want to talk about the next one?
So thanks for that, Brandie. So a couple of things as we move into breakout rooms. I'm going to go through the directions. So one, I saw at least a couple of people put in the chat in terms of their opening responses that they're here to learn more about critical race theory. So we definitely encourage you to go back through the chat and read the responses of other folks, because so many are just hitting it the nail on the head. And in particular, I wanted to highlight Kate's response, mainly because as a high school English teacher, former high school, I'll always be a high school English teacher, but it just makes me think about lessons that I would teach about imagery. And Kate wrote, CRT illustrates the racial molasses of all of us in the US are embedded in. And I just like that image of molasses and racial molasses just is really sticking with me. So A+ to Kate from Miss Owens, the high school English teacher. So, and that's a kind of a segue into what we're going to do in the breakout rooms. And then when we come back and share out, is that we want to highlight that particular tenet about counter narratives. And essentially that's what we will be producing today during the workshop. So thinking about some of the experiences that you have had as an educator, or even in your own education, and utilizing this lens of critical race theory to interpret that story, right? So a lot of times we could see something, we can tell a story, and on its surface, it may mean one thing, but when we take the time to dig deeper, to break it apart, then we can see more of what is happening. And then also just want to point out that we pulled this quote from an Ed Week article, I believe is a couple of years ago now, but really outlines what's going on with critical race theory, what opponents have to say, how they're trying to recreate this caricature of critical race theory. So that's another place to go and check out to learn more about critical race theory if you are here explicitly to learn more about it. So as an example, I'm going to share a story, one of my experiences. So from 2016 to 2019, I served as a member of the Newark Board of Education. And as the chair of the Program and Instruction Committee, I led an analysis about the class size and composition among the district's comprehensive and magnet schools, right? And just to be clear, comprehensive schools, meaning neighborhood schools. You live in a certain catchment area, you attend that school. Magnet schools are usually specialized in Newark. Public schools, we have Science Park, as you see an image of, Arts High School, which is, I believe, the oldest arts high school in the United States, technology, so on and so forth, right? So they're specialized schools. Usually you have to test into them. So we knew as education advocates on the ground that there were disparities, and I leveraged my role on the Board of Education to actually be able to study the numbers and present a report publicly. Right. And so thinking about, and I also want to add a reason why we wanted to conduct this study is because we had recently initiated a universal enrollment system, which is a part of the package of neoliberal education reforms that would be rolling out. We're rolling out all across the country in urban districts in particular, that said, we're going to have all parents and all families apply to the school that they want to attend. And it wasn't just the schools in the school district, but also the majority of the charter schools in our city. So if we were finding was problematic that this universal enrollment system was actually siphoning off the students who showed the most academic achievement, the students whose families had most access to resources. So we knew that on the ground, but we wanted to show the numbers. So in analyzing my story, I thought about this story through whiteness as property and also the interest convergence tenets. And in particular, I'll just read this. Through the admissions policy and practice, Science Park, which is the top high school in the city, is preserved as the magnet school for white students. And few to no parents from the East Ward, and some of you may be like, there's white people in Newark. So yes, so we have a very large Portuguese population. And so, right, Portugal is in Europe, so they are of European descent and considered white when we look at the demographics of our school district. So the majority of students who were attending Science Park were actually coming from the East Ward, one particular part of the city. And so none of these parents were protesting these large class sizes or the universal enrollment system because their children were in a place where they had access and privilege through attending Science Park High School. Right. So that's my quick story and my analysis. I definitely did not want to leave the breakout rooms. There were some great stories being shared and analysis being conducted. So who we want to call on first?
Does someone from Group 7 want to share? There was a shout out to Group 7. That was lovely in the chat.
Sure, I don't mind being the reporter here. We got to hear two people's stories, experiences in our breakout group. The first was Christopher's story. when he moved from a school system in Pennsylvania to a school system in DC. I can't remember exactly the steps that were put into creating the affinity groups, but at his school system, they decided to create affinity groups that would inform the curriculum at his school. At this space, there were affinity groups made for just about every identity except for the Black identity. So there was not an affinity group made for Black people at his school. And in fact, his team had actually specifically said that Blackness was not allowed to be addressed in the curriculum, which was horrifying to hear. I remember this one part of his story that really struck hard with me was that the Black experience is an elective in the curriculum and it's not fully integrated into the main curriculum. So as Christopher was recounting his story, he noted that one of the CRT analyses that we could make is seeing like whiteness as property. You know, whiteness holds all the space, it takes up all the space, it takes up all the curriculum, and there isn't room for Blackness to be centered and uplifted and empowered when it comes to the physical space and the space that is our curriculum and shaping it. So that was one of the stories that we heard about. I don't know if I should go into the next one or if I should let someone else from a different group speak.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Maybe we'll have let another group speak, but I think that is a really important lens that we're taking through that. And we're starting to, hopefully we followed the rooms, but we're starting to see like critical race theory is a very useful lens to analyze multiple situations that are happening to us in schools, even the way that we are teaching. So I'll let who else wants to share to kind of build on that?
I'm going to take presenter's prerogative and jump in real quick. Just because there was another story that resonated with me. So a friend and colleague of mine, we were developing curriculum around African-American literature and Puerto Rican literature, because those were predominant populations at our school. And so we worked together, and then we were advocating to the school administration to actually have these courses, this curriculum we were creating become courses, rather than just offer them as like students sign up for creative writing, but we would just tell them, hey, this is what the class is really about. Which one do you want to attend? But anyway, little subversiveness there. But we were, one of the responses we received is that African-American history is already a course that was offered. So yeah, that's what you're going to tell me. We already have the Black experience covered, right? And again, this is in Newark, predominantly Black and brown city. So that reminded me of that story.
If I could just chime in really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, so consequently, I've left that school. But you know, I think that it was an eye-opening, you know, experience, you know, for me as well, because, you know, I'm coming from Southwestern Pennsylvania, which is a predominantly white and conservative community on the border of West Virginia. And so I thought that, you know, kind of moving to the DC metro area where there are more brown and Black people, surely there wouldn't be such a structural and institutional bias, maybe not as pronounced as what I had experienced. But, you know, to your point, Leah, you know, these are happening in even predominantly Black and brown communities. The problem is no worse or no less of an issue anywhere else. And so, you know, we've got to take where we are everywhere, and we've got to push these conversations to the front. we've got to continue to kind of have these conversations and look at how to dismantle these systems of dehumanization and oppression. So I thank you so much for sharing the story, and I appreciate kind of the affirmation and validation that you offered, Leah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thank you both. We have time for probably another group to share.
Yes.
I can share from group 1.
Yeah.
Just quickly, we went through 3 stories. The first one about an educator who was doing DEIB work in a predominantly white school and was actually told like that work is not welcome here anymore and was pushed out of her job. There's another story about a white teacher teaching a book with the N-word, and a Black student asked her to stop saying the word in class, and it got escalated to a principal whose response was, "I don't get it, these things don't happen here," because it was a predominantly white school. I should say the first one we saw as like a whiteness as property or interest convergence problem, that the school didn't see this as a problem they needed to address or an area that you needed to grow in. And the second story, we talked about the permanence of racism, that, you know, these things don't happen here, that kind of ignorance or like willful obscuring of underlying context was present. And I was talking about I do curriculum design and civics, and we talk about designing curriculum that meets students where they are, which often means addressing feelings of anger toward government that doesn't represent them, which is like not only justifiable, but kind of accurate, instead of assuming neutrality as kind of a counter narrative.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We actually have time for one more. We have 3 more minutes. So one more group want to share? Wendy, so you raise your hand. You're muted right now. There you go.
If no one else is volunteering, I'll share. I didn't quite get through my story with my group, but just to make it as brief as possible, about 6 years ago, I think it was, our high school had a big celebration of Black Lives Matter in education. And we're right across the campus from our high school, in the middle school where I teach. I'm a world language teacher, French and Spanish, grade 6 through 8. And I thought, you know, wow, there's all this stuff going on at the high school. Why aren't we doing this at the middle school? So I talked to a few other teachers. I okayed it with my principal, ordered some Black Lives Matter flags, got a lot of material from Department of Education, Black Lives Matter curriculum in DC, actually, downloaded the posters and different materials that we could share, and maybe stories that we could read to build some community during that week. And Black History Month is always up actually even now, still hosted by world language teachers, because we do a lot of research and projects on Afro-Latino history, as well as in French. I do a lot with the Caribbean and French Canada and France. And so that's always been highlighted, but just through our content levels, our content areas. So anyway, get the flags, get everything organized, get everything together, ordered like 300 pins, you know, off my Amazon points. And we started to decorate and talk about and celebrate Black Lives Matter in Education Week. Before the end of the week, I think it was on a Wednesday, if I remember correctly, I was called into my principal's office. And he said, "Wendy, you got to take down the flag." And I said, "What?" He says, "You got to take down the flag," which was central to our main entrance, right? I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, I'm getting a lot of emails from parents, and they say, you know, you can't run this with the students because it's a political platform." Now he knew that was wrong, but he was getting all this pressure, and he's not the leader we have now. He's a nice guy, but he backs down when it comes to parents. I said, this is a social justice platform. It has nothing to do with a particular party. So that's what I stated. He said, you still have to take it down. So I was instructed to take it down. I did place it in my classroom, which I was asked not to do, but I did. And we had a new group of 8th graders that were just coming together as our Black student leaders in our school. It was a whole new affinity group that we were just building. And so we called them together, myself and the other teachers that worked with them. And we asked our principal, well, can the students put something up? Because they're not educators, they're students, and they have the freedom of their voices. And so they created this beautiful poster that said Black Lives Matter, and posted it right where the flag had been. And that stayed up for the rest of the year. And I felt like that was such a powerful moment for all of us as a community. Yeah, so liberalism, I think, would be one of the tenets there, and white possession.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And Keisha's sharing some awesome toolkits and resources in the chat. So this is pushback that is very real that we feel like we're facing in schools. And so those are very useful resources. And then Leah's going to talk to us a little bit more specifically about that pushback. Christopher, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to say, take, kind of a moment to just say, thanks for using your privilege and your platform to advocate for justice. I see a lot of, women, in this group. And I just want to say that I guess highlight the importance of all of us, each of us, kind of using our privilege, using our platform to affirmatively act on behalf of equity and justice. These actions in your staff meetings, these actions in your committee meetings, these actions in your classrooms, in your community interactions, with your interactions with students, they matter. If I, as an adult, if I, as a grown 45-year-old man, feel dehumanized by these structural and institutional biases, I can only imagine the effect that this has on our children. And if they don't have advocates like each and every one of these powerful women in this room, if you keep your mouth shut, if you remain silent and allow these systems to silence you or to force you into inaction, then these children, I mean, certainly, I don't expect to have anybody advocate for me, but these children will not have anybody to advocate for them. And one of the things that, I know that we all got into this work for is to do right by our kids. And if we don't lean into our discomfort, if we don't use our privilege and our platform to be able to advocate for justice on behalf of these kids, then we're inconsistent with the reason why we even got into this in the first place. So Wendy, thank you. Like your scene, it mattered. What you did, what you said, how you react, because it means something different when it comes from you than it does when it comes from me. So just, I just want to just take a minute. I'm not going to, take up too much space. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Christopher. I mean, I think we need to add Christopher on as a co-presenter because those words were so powerful. And I think
Amen.
it was an excellent way to bring together the stories that were shared. And just again, to echo what he's saying, we all matter. Our stories matter. Sharing our experiences matters, right? These narratives matter. And when we keep them to ourselves or we brush them off as commonsensical, right? There's something that Kevin Kumashero writes a lot about. So I definitely encourage you to look into his work. But these things become behaviors and practices become common sense. And we don't think about it and we don't interrogate them. and then they rule and continue to perpetuate structural racism. So we have to share our stories. We have to take some time to step back and think about them. And I'm just feeling, just because it's such a powerful space right now, I do see a couple, or at least one hand, Colleen's hand up. I don't mind taking Colleen, if that's cool with you, Brandie, and then we'll just do a quicker wrap up than we plan. Go ahead, Colleen.
Thank you so much, Leah. I appreciate it. I just wanted to appreciate Christopher for what you said. I teach MSW students at the University of Denver, and a lot of social workers are white women. And a lot of times in the classes that I teach, there's this whole focus on kind of trashing white men as the problem, and white women are the problem as well. And I'm a white woman and I want to be accountable to that. And so I think it's just really important to acknowledge that we have power, we do have privilege, and we have a responsibility to utilize that power and privilege. So I just wanted to say that for folks who are on the call, I just wanted to kind of echo your awesome words, Christopher. So thank you for saying what you said.
So thank you for that. I'm gonna, in our last, I think, minute or so, I'm just gonna throw the slides back up. And so just point out, so this comes from the Education, Justice, and Research Organizing Collaborative, which is a part, these slides are a part of a larger toolkit to get an understanding of the attacks on critical race theory. And so just quickly, I won't read these things and you have access to the slides, but the comments on both of these slides mirror a lot of the definitions and phrases and comments that were put into the chat at the beginning of the session. And we have to also recognize that these conversations are continuing to occur. I just put a link to a news article in the chat, a very recent news article about this conversation that's happening in the legislative chambers in Missouri, right? And so folks have, particularly the right, has a lot to say about why critical race theory should not show up in our classrooms, quote unquote, but they don't have a clear understanding of what it is in the first place, or they want to recreate what critical race theory is about. So developing common understandings of what it is that we're actually talking about is significant as well. And of course, I can't go without mentioning the AP African American History course being banned exactly in Florida, exactly, Prima. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, or Prema. So it's very much alive, this conversation, and the more that we are informing ourselves and educating ourselves and each other, the better we'll be able to collectively push back against the attacks and make sure that we are enacting a racially equitable agenda.
Yeah, and just to close us off, if you want to learn more, we won't pose the question just because but you can think about it. What are you noticing in current events about CRT? But we are launching a critical race theory and the politics of curriculum, asynchronous or self-paced course soon. So you can sign up for our newsletter. If you click on that, it will take you to it. On the images, it will take you to the newsletter to sign up. And it'll talk about some of these things, not only what it is and what it isn't, but also like ways to engage in what Rochelle Gutierrez has called creative insubordination, which is ways to kind of push back and do kind of some of what Wendy was saying was done to work around the pushback we're receiving. Yeah, and then we also have monthly workshops that you're welcome to join our community. I think it's important for us who are doing this work to do it in community. So if that's something that interests you, you can visit radicalpedagogyinstitute.com.